You are the weaver of frontier destinies, a scriptwriter specialized in deep, emotionally intense, and linear narratives of the Old West, focusing on cultural encounters involving Apaches. Your task is to write Chapter 1 of a story whose general premise and title will be provided separately, strictly following the Chapter 1 outline below as the absolute framework for this opening scene. 500 words. Craft a concise, linear script focused exclusively on the events in this Chapter 1 outline, culminating in a strong cliffhanger leading into Chapter 2 and closing with a subscription call to action, all in Brazilian Portuguese, infused with the rich stylistic tone of the Old West Apache genre. Chapter 1 outline, structured into 7 narrative points. 1. Powerful and concise. Begin with Maria, a homeless woman, on the cruel streets of a small Old West town. Dramatically highlight her unjust capture and imprisonment inside an iron cage in the town center, where she is displayed as a warning to other undesirables. This introduction must immediately captivate and grip the viewer. Quick and evocative setting establishment. Paint with brevity the cruelty of this small town, the harsh climate, and the hostile environment, reinforcing Maria's overwhelming sense of anguish and isolation. Deep dive into the protagonist's initial situation. Present Maria in depth, revealing her inner strength and dignity despite the humiliating situation, unjustly judged and abandoned in the cage. Clear introduction of the primary central conflict. Make clear that her imprisonment is an unjust punishment born from the population's indifference and hostility, who keep her there as a warning. Do not resolve this conflict. It will fuel the unfolding saga. 5. Initial tension escalation and charged interactions. Show the tense atmosphere and the townsfolk's disdain or indifference nearby, as well as Maria's silent attempts to resist and not surrender to despair. 6. Single turning point. Strong cliffhanger for Chapter 2, Chapter 1 climax. Against a dark, stormy night backdrop, introduce for the first time the lone stranger arriving in town, the Comanche widower named Nico, driven by a search for justice and drawn by rumors of injustice. Capture the moment when the silence of the town breaks with the sound of his horses' hooves, opening the narrative to new hope and tension. 7. Subscription call to action. Following this powerful hook, include the exact subscription prompt below. Do not request likes or comments. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino ou o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. Detailed and add. Technical instructions for this chapter. Maintain linearity and limited scope. A. Evocative emotional intensity. Convey Maria's suffering and resilience without superficiality, forging an emotional bond with the audience. B. Engaging rhythm and cadence. Maintain progressive flow without time jumps or parallel narratives. C. Immersive sensory description. Employ details of the cold iron cage, the smell of dust and rain, and hostile town sounds for immersion. D. Subtle cinematic atmosphere. Construct nearly visual scenes, from flickering lantern light to the night's penetrating chill. E. Emotionally charged and tense atmosphere. Weave fear and hope into the narrative. F. Authentic and plausible impact. Respect the historical and social verisimilitude of the Old West. G. Contrast of apparent strength, human vulnerability, and cultural wisdom. While not exploring Miko deeply yet, hint at the aura of the Comanche widower as a complex figure approaching. Strict prohibitions for the final script. Do not use markers, notes, titles, greetings, or any labels. Provide only fluid narrative text, ready for narration. General additional instructions. Language and narration. Brazilian Portuguese. Third-person omniscient narration, focusing on emotions and perceptions. Script format. Continuous running text. Approximately 500 words. Linear progression with no narrative digressions. Use this Chapter 1 outline and all the above guidelines to compose a detailed, instructive prompt for the scriptwriter. This text will be used exactly as a prompt for generating Chapter 1. Begin formulating the prompt now. Dust hung heavy in the dry air as Nico dismounted his horse just beyond the town's outskirts, his eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his worn hat. The fading light cast long shadows over the wooden buildings, their faces worn by time and neglect. From his vantage point, the iron cage stood grim and cold in the center of the square, a cruel monument beneath the harsh glare of the evening sun. Inside, Maria sat, shoulders squared despite the biting sting of rust on her skin and the scornful glances from the few townsfolk passing by. Her eyes met Nico's from behind the bars, a silent understanding threaded through the space between them. Nico's memories churned beneath that hard gaze, the loss of his wife still a raw ache. Beneath his calm exterior, a code of honor etched deeply into his soul. He knew injustice when he saw it, and the cage holding Maria was nothing but a brutal testament to the town's cruelty. How many others had been broken before her? His hand brushed against the worn grip of his rifle as he weighed his options. Intervene openly and risk becoming their next prisoner, or remain a ghost in the shadows. Yet, the faint, stubborn fire he glimpsed in Maria's eyes dared him not to turn away. The town's air was thick with suspicion and apathy. From behind shuttered windows and cracked doorways came whispered judgments, while the occasional sneer or hostile word traveled like poisoned wind. Nico noted the men who stood close to the sheriff's office, their eyes cold and watchful, guarding cruel orders like a pack guarding a wounded prey. Maria, despite her plight, met their derision with a quiet dignity that stirred an unexpected respect within him. She would not surrender, not yet. Slowly, Nico circled closer, careful to stay in the alleys where the shadows pooled darkest. His gaze never left Maria's stoic form. She lifted a hand, tracing a faint cross against the imprint left by steel bars. It was a small gesture, but to Nico, it spoke of a past filled with resilience and unyielding spirit. He saw beyond the cage, beyond the worn clothes and dirt-smeared face. There was a fighter here, even if the town sought to break her down. His mind raced, tallying risks, the sheriff's cruel reputation, the watchfulness of the guards, the unforgiving eyes of the townspeople. But blind justice was no justice at all. A plan began to form, born from years of survival on harsh lands and even harsher hearts. Maria's gaze locked onto Nico's, as if sensing his purpose before he spoke. A flicker of hope passed between them, fragile yet fierce. Her lips parted in a silent thank you, or maybe a question. Would he be the one to deliver her from this nightmare? The distant clatter of boots echoed sharply, cutting through the thickening dusk. Nico froze, watching as two guards exchanged curt words, their eyes scanning the streets with a growing unease. His presence was no longer a secret. The seed of his intervention had been planted, and the town's handlers were already growing wary. With practiced calm, Nico edged back into the gathering gloom. Every step weighed heavy, the consequences of his choice looming like the descending night. Yet, as he disappeared into the twisted alleys and crumbling wooden facades, his purpose burned brighter. Maria's imprisonment could no longer be ignored. The cage was not just iron and sorrow. It was a challenge thrown down before a man who had never once turned from a fight. And as the first stars blinked coldly over the restless town, the clang of distant chains echoed faintly. The game had begun, and no one would emerge unchanged. A shadow shifted near the sheriff's office, and a silent watcher slipped into the night. The threads of fate were tightening around Nico and Maria, weaving a story of courage and desperation. The protection of honor demanded action, and soon the price of silence would prove far too great. The night had barely settled when Nico returned to the town's outskirts under the cloak of darkness. The bitter wind bit through his coat as he crouched behind a battered cart, eyes fixed on the dim glow of the jailhouse. Shadows sprawled across the rough wooden walls, but nothing was hidden from the sheriff's ever-watchful gaze. The unmistakable rattle of iron echoed faintly Maria's cage, each clink a cruel reminder of her captivity. Nico felt the weight of the town breathing down his neck, heavy with suspicion and hostility. He wasn't alone this time. At his side, Jeb, once a feared gunslinger, now faded into obscurity, whispered low, his grit still sharp beneath years of weariness. That cruel bastard's eyes are everywhere. We tread on thin ice, Comanche. Nico nodded, the lines of strategy already forming. Jeb's hatred for the sheriff was no secret, and their unlikely alliance was a fragile thread weaving through a town thick with greed and fear. Across the street, a group of men lingered near the saloon's swinging doors. Their faces were hard, eyes sharper. Among them, the sheriff, a hulking figure of muscle and menace, scowled beneath his battled hat. His jaw tightened as he surveyed the streets. The cruel spectacle of Maria, trapped in iron bars, served a grim purpose. Not just punishment, but a warning scrawled in flesh and rust for all who dared defy his rule. Inside that cage, Maria's spirit burned quietly but fiercely. Though grime smeared her worn clothes and the cold steel pressed into her skin, she held her head high. At twilight, when the town's shadows lengthened and voices grew scarce, she whispered fragments of her story in stolen breaths, a life shredded by loss and survival, marked by the defiance that led to her imprisonment. Nico watched her, recognizing the echo of scars he had yet to confront. The plan was simple, yet deadly. Strike swiftly before suspicion gave rise to full alarm. Nico's gaze flicked over the shuttered windows and narrow alleys where spies could lurk. The sheriff wielded control like a blade. Any misstep could mean immediate capture or worse. But he could not stand idle. To free Maria was to challenge a corrupt empire built on silence and fear. Under the blanket of night, Nico slipped toward the cage, Jeb an unseen shadow at his back. The cold iron was unforgiving beneath his gloved hands. A faint scrape alerted them, a sudden surge of voices close by. Nico's heart hammered, muscles coiled like steel springs. Before he could undo the fastenings, a gravelly voice cut through the dark. Halt, right there. The sheriff had appeared, lantern casting a harsh light that splintered across. Nico's face. His men closed in like wolves, cruel grins twisting beneath their dust-streaked jackets. The confrontation was brutal, but brief. Nico's calm resolve met the sheriff's snarling rage. Steel clashed with words sharp as bullets. He parried, then dashed into the labyrinth of alleys, his boots pounding over broken wood and dry earth. Behind him, Maria's muffled cry for release fractured the night air. She was trapped, alone again, beneath the unforgiving gaze of the town. The cage was no longer merely iron and rust. It had become her prison of despair. From his hidden perch, Nico swallowed the sting of failure, heart clenched for the woman whose eyes had met his with silent hope. But desperation sharpened his resolve. He would not abandon her. Under a waning moon, he found refuge in a dilapidated warehouse at the edge of town, shadows curling thicker around him. There, whispers filled the stale air, rumors mingling with the scent of sweat and old whiskey. Jeb exchanged wary glances with Nico. "They're not just punishing her," he muttered. "There's more beneath this cruelty. Something they're hiding. The sheriff's darker secrets lie beneath that iron." Nico's mind churned, replaying fragments of overheard barroom talk and veiled threats. Maria hadn't just been locked away to silence a troublemaker. She held knowledge, a witness to a twisted deed the sheriff wished buried deep. That knowledge was power, one that threatened to shatter the fragile order he had imposed with blood and fear. Outside, the town's heartbeat quickened with unease. Men moved in whispered coordination. Shadows cast long by lanterns as rumors grew into dangerous truths. The twisted web of greed and intimidation spun tighter. Nico met Jed's steady gaze and felt the cold clarity of the fight ahead. The liberation of one woman was no longer a matter of mercy. It was a reckoning long overdue, a storm gathering beneath a brittle peace. Beneath the fading stars, a silent figure appeared near the sheriff's steps, a shadow cloaked in silence, watching. The night carried a promise. The secrets locked within Maria's cage would not remain buried, and the guardians of injustice had already sensed the tremors of their unraveling. The game had begun in earnest. The lines were drawn, and the price of silence would prove too great to bear. Night had deepened its hold on the town, swallowing corners and quiet streets in shadows. Nico and Jeb perched like ghosts near the outskirts, watching the iron cage stand grim beneath the weak glow of a lantern swaying in the wind. The once crowded square now held a fragile silence, punctuated only by the distant bark of a dog and the restless shifting of townsfolk on porches. Inside the cage, Maria sat pressed low against the cold bars, her spirit refusing to bend despite the new weight of darkness settling over her. Jeb's voice broke softly through the stillness. "The sheriff's been planning something," he said, eyes scanning the horizon. "A public spectacle. He wants the town to see what happens to those who step out of line." His grip tightened on the worn rifle slung low at his side. "It's meant to scare folks into silence, to remind them who's in charge." Nico's gaze remained fixed on Maria, illuminated by the flickering lantern light that revealed the dirt and wear on her face. Despite her torn clothes and bruised frame, she held her chin high, a defiance that seemed carved from steel. He could almost hear the fractured memories behind her silent stare, a past marked by loss, yet laced with an unyielding strength that refused to be crushed. She had become emblematic of the forgotten, shackled not only in iron, but by the cold judgment of a cruel town. Slowly the wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry earth and smoke. Maria half closed her eyes, drawing deep breaths that floated out like whispers. A faint line of words hovered at the edges, stories never fully spoken aloud. She was no mere offender. Fragments of her life's trials flickered in the folds of her silence. That resilience, that fierce dignity, despite everything, stirred something in Nico, something that tethered their fates together beyond this cruel cage. Across the street, the sheriff's office was a fortress of shadow and menace. The sheriff himself, bulky and unyielding, paced with grim determination under the weakening lantern light. His eyes, sharp and cold, scanned the town square with calculating cruelty. The cage was more than punishment. It was his tool to enforce obedience, to choke any spark of dissent before it could spread. Tonight's event would be a harsh reminder, a warning carved deep into the town's bones. Jeb's voice returned, lower now. "Word is, he's bringing folks in from neighboring settlements, looking to turn this into a display they won't soon forget." His gaze hardened. "If we're going to move, we need to act before the crowd swells." Nico nodded, the outline of a plan forming in the depths of his steady gaze. Retrieving Maria meant more than freeing one woman. It meant cutting a thread in the sheriff's dark web, exposing the rot that strangled the town. But every step carried the shadow of betrayal. Informants whispered in every corner. Eyes lurked behind windows and barrels. Suddenly, from a narrow alley emerged a figure wrapped in a dark cloak, moving silently like a shadow, slipping through the night. Neither Nico nor Jeb spoke. Both knew the presence spelled danger beyond any they had faced yet. The stranger's gaze was hidden beneath a hood, but the tension radiating from their stillness was unmistakable. Whatever side this mysterious silhouette took, it was clear they held their own purpose, tied to the unfolding reckoning. Back in the cage, Maria's eyes flicked toward the dark figure. An unspoken warning passed between them, carried on the night's chill, a warning that the storm gathering over the town would not spare anyone. A harsh wind cut through the square, jangling the rusty bars and stirring swirling dust in the lantern's glow. The sheriff's men began to move with greater urgency, their voices low but sharp as they organized themselves for the coming spectacle. The air grew thick with anticipation and dread. This was no mere punishment anymore, but a message in blood and fear. Nico tightened his grip on the rifle, feeling every heartbeat echo the weight of their task. Maria was not just a prisoner, she was a beacon of defiance, a spark that, if fanned, might ignite the whole town's simmering unrest. And somewhere beneath the surface, a secret lay buried, one that threatened to unravel the sheriff's grip and topple his corrupt reign. The shadowy figure stepped forward, revealing a lean hand clasping a folded piece of parchment. A silent exchange passed between the stranger and Jeb. A map, a warning, or perhaps an unexpected offer of help. Nico's eyes narrowed, sensing this new element could tilt the precarious balance they were fighting to hold. As the night deepened, Maria drew a breath so quiet it almost went unnoticed. Her lips barely moved as she traced a finger along the inside of the cage. A silent vow forged in the cold steel. Somewhere beyond the walls of this forsaken town, freedom waited, but reaching it would come at a price none were yet ready to pay. The sheriff's cruel laughter rippled from the porch, dark and triumphant. "Let 'em see," he spat. "End this, tonight." Nico and Jeb exchanged a glance weighted with iron resolve. The city held its breath as the first lantern flickered brighter, lighting the path to a night no one would forget, and a war that had only just begun. Night deepened its hold on the small town, folding its crooked streets and rough timber buildings under a cloak of shadows. Nico and Jeb crouched side by side behind a broken wagon near the edge of the town square, eyes fixed on the iron cage where Maria remained confined. The faint flicker of a lantern cast long, trembling shadows on her worn face, revealing the defiance burning quietly behind her tired eyes. She sat motionless, pressed low against the unforgiving bars, but her spirit refused to break under the weight of darkness that settled like dust on every surface. Jeb's voice cut through the silence, low and gruff. "Sheriff's fixin' to make a show out of this, a public spectacle. Wants the whole town to see what happens to folks who step out of line." His gaze shifted toward the sheriff's office, a squat building with barred windows that seemed to watch the square like a sentinel. "Means to scare 'em all into shutting their mouths." Nico's gaze never wavered from Maria. Despite the dirt smudging her face and the cold steel biting into her wrists, she held her chin high, like a fighter who knew the value of every breath stolen against the tide. Her silence told a story that reverberated deeper than simple cruelty. He saw traces of a shattered past woven between the scars, of a soul battered but still unyielding. Maria was more than a prisoner. She was a symbol tied to the town's fragile equilibrium, and freeing her meant toppling more than just iron bars. A chill crept through the night air, carrying the sharp scent of dry earth and smoke. Maria half closed her eyes, drawing in steady breaths that seemed to steady the restless wind itself. In her gaze flickered the memory of defiant whispers, fragmented but fierce, fragments of a life marked by loss and endurance. Nico felt the weight of those stories press against the cage's rusted frame. They were cries for justice, written in silence. Across the street, the sheriff moved like a dark shadow cast from stone. Bulky and imposing, his broad frame stalked the porch of his office, eyes narrowed and cold, burning like embers beneath his battered hat. He surveyed the square, his glance slicing through the night with the menace of a predator. That cage was not merely a prison. It was a brutal tool designed to remind the town of who wielded power, a dark promise of obedience enforced with steel and fear. Tonight, the planned event would spread that message like wildfire. Jed's voice returned, quieter still. "Picked up word neighbors round here are bringing extra muscle. Folks from other spreads coming in. Gonna turn this into a damn show." His knuckles whitened as he clenched the worn wood of his rifle stock. "If we're gonna act, it has to be soon, before more eyes come." Nico nodded slowly, the outline of a desperate plan sharpening in his mind. Freeing Maria was no longer only mercy. It was a strike against the rotten core of the sheriff's reign, a chance to pull the dark thread that kept the town shackled in silence. But every step was a risk. The sheriff's spies were like shadows themselves, lurking behind cracked shutters, beneath piles of stacked wood, watching, waiting. From a distant alley stepped a figure, clad in a dark cloak, sliding through the night with almost unnatural stillness. Neither Nico nor Jeb spoke, but the tension throbbed between them like a rattlesnake coiled and ready to strike. The figure's face was obscured, but the aura of purpose was undeniable. Whether friend or foe, this mysterious watcher, Oots, hastening preparations that portended violence. What had been a silent cage now pulsed with looming dread. It was no longer simply punishment, but a message carved in bone and rust. Nico tightened his hold on his rifle, his heartbeat a thunder beneath the creeping silence. Maria was not merely captive flesh and bone. She was a flame kindled in defiance, a risk that could set the whole town aflame with unrest. Beneath the surface, a secret lay waiting, a truth that could topple a tyrant cloaked in his badge and bravado. Suddenly, the cloaked stranger stepped forward, producing a folded piece of parchment held tight in a pale, steady hand. A silent exchange passed between the figure and Jeb, brief and urgent. A map, a warning, or an unexpected offer of alliance. Nico's eyes narrowed, sensing the delicate balance of their fragile fight teetering on a new axis. Maria breathed quietly, almost inaudibly, tracing a finger along the cold frame of her iron prison. A vow was born in that subtle motion, forged from years of endurance and sharpened by hope. Somewhere beyond the walls of this town, freedom waited, but the path to it would demand a price few dared pay. From the porch, the sheriff's harsh laugh cut through the night, dark and triumphant. "Let 'em watch," he spat. "End this tonight." Nico and Jeb exchanged a final grim glance, and as the lantern's glow brightened, casting long shadows toward an unknown dawn, the fragile calm shattered. The city held its breath, and the war for truth and freedom ignited once more. The pounding of heavy boots behind them sent echoes skittering through the narrow streets, as Nico and Maria sprinted, breaths ragged, hearts hammered fierce and wild against worn ribs. Men armed with grim purpose surged after them, shouting orders, the crack of rifles breaking the uneasy night. Shadows stretched and shrank in the flicker of lantern light, thrown from shuttered windows and swinging saloon doors. Nico moved with steady resolve, despite the burn of pain in his side, where a bullet grazed him moments before, blood cooling through layers of dust and sweat. He shielded Maria as they darted through alleys, past stacks of broken crates and rusted tools, the scent of dry hay and spilled whiskey filling the air. Her steps faltered once, caught in tangled debris, but his strong grip pulled her free before the pursuers closed in. They reached an old warehouse, its weathered boards sagging under years of neglect. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole. The stillness was thick, pregnant with secrets. Maria slid down against cold wooden planks, chest heaving. Her eyes, wide and haunted, flickered in the dimness, sharp with fear, but also a flicker of trust, fragile but real. Neither spoke at first. The chase had thinned their wills but forged a new bond, born from shared desperation and kindled by the whispered truths hanging between them like ghosts. In that battered refuge, Maria finally let some of her walls fall. She traced a trembling finger on the scarred floor, and in a whisper barely caught by the night, confessed the burden she carried. The crime she had witnessed, the wrenching injustice that condemned her to iron bars, was a secret dark enough to topple the sheriff's iron grip. She had watched him order a brother's cold murder, a deed veiled beneath twisted lies and fear, silenced by threats smeared with blood. Now, her silence was the sheriff's shield, and her freedom was the sword that could shatter his reign. Nico listened, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. His past loss, the sharp ache of his wife's absence, fused with this grim resolve. He was no stranger to sacrifice, no stranger to standing for the forgotten. And though wounded, the fire rising in his soul threatened to burn cages, both of iron and fear. Maria's voice cracked as she spoke of all she had lost, her family, her dignity, the fragile hope she once held for those other women in town who suffered cruel fates hidden beneath the sheriff's shadow. "I trusted once," she said, eyes glistening, "but now, only you." Her stare bore into his, a challenge wrapped in fragile hope. Outside, the town's heartbeat quickened. From the sheriff's office porch, grim faces swelled with fury and fear. Word was out. A man had dared defy the law and free the woman imprisoned. As an example, the sheriff himself, loose with rage, his voice booming in commands as men loaded rifles and strapped on pistols. The prize was not just the escaped woman or the man who meddled. It was the preservation of power, no matter the cost. A rider galloped up from the horizon, kicking dust into the cold air. A troop of reinforcements, summoned to snuff rebellion like a candle's flame. The town was sealing its fate with steel and gunpowder. In the darkened warehouse, the urgency was palpable. Nico rose, steadying himself on a splintered beam. Maria, eyeing the blood on his side, shook her head fiercely. Retreat was their only chance. Yet, within that desperation, a hardened resolve glimmered. Their alliance was no mere convenience. It was a pact born in fire. "We cannot stay," Nico said, voice low but fierce. "They'll drown this town in pain to drag us back." His hand brushed her arm in reassurance, a silent vow between two souls scarred by betrayal. Maria nodded, swallowing the tremor in her throat. Her cage was gone, but the walls of their pursuers closed tighter. Trust was all she held on to, and now it was his burden to protect. Together, they melted into the night's cold embrace, shadows fleeing shadows. The chase was far from over. Above, a lantern's light flickered near the sheriff's door, eyes gleaming with merciless intent. One by one, the hunters took up their post, the town awakening fully to the manhunt. Whispers spread like wildfire. Soon the reward for their capture would turn hunters into ravenous beasts. And as distant hoofbeats multiplied, thunder rolling over the hills like an ominous drumbeat, a chilling truth took hold. The town could hold no sanctuary for them now. The trap had been sprung. The noose was tightening. Freedom was slipping fast, and the price to keep it would test every broken heart's last breath. The battle for hope had begun. The road stretched endless before them, a ribbon of dusty earth carving its path through the unforgiving wilderness. Nico led cautiously, his gaze scanning the rolling hills that framed the horizon. Behind him, Maria's footsteps stirred the brittle grass, a whisper of persistence amid the harsh vastness. Each mile was a step away from brutal captivity and closer to something fragile, a chance at sanctuary. His side throbbed sharply with every movement, the wound from the skirmish a raw reminder of their peril. Yet pain was a mere shadow compared to the weight pressing on his heart, the tremulous hope caught in Maria's wary glance. Trust had been brittle once, but now it was a fragile thread weaving tighter between them, born of desperation and guarded resilience. Despite the ragged breaths and unspoken fears, a tentative bond had formed, rising steadier with every guarded mile. The land around them breathed solemn and indifferent, the wind carrying the dry scent of sagebrush and distant pines. Above, a slate-gray sky, bruised with gathering clouds, heavy with the promise of rain. The vast silence was punctuated only by the occasional call of a hawk and the crunch of their boots on gravel and cracked stones. Nature offered no judgment, only the relentless testing of wills beneath an impartial sky. Maria's hands clung tightly to the thin cloth of her tattered coat, knuckles white against the fabric. The faint ache in her back mirrored the deeper scars hidden beneath layers of dirt and sorrow. Memories pressed in on her, shadows of that cruel cage where iron bars had once held her in silent torment. Her mind often returned there, to faces glazed with indifference, to whispered curses and the pounding of fearful hearts in a town turned cold. Yet the rawest wound was the betrayal of hope, the bitter taste of forsaken trust. But here, moving away from the town's suffocating grip, Maria felt a flicker awaken inside, a cautious dare to hope again. Nico's presence was a shield, his steadfastness a promise carved from the harsh terrain itself. With each step, she wrestled the ghosts of doubt and fear, learning slowly the rhythm of trust in a man both stranger and guardian. The path they took wound past scrub oaks, their twisted limbs bare against the coming storm. A distant crack of thunder rippled across the hills, rolling in a sonorous warning. For all the quiet, danger was never far. The relentless chase of men hungry to reclaim what they claimed was theirs. Nico's wary eyes caught every rustle in brush and every fleeting shadow that darted at the edge of sight. Enemy tracks might be close. "Keep close," he murmured, voice low but steady, wrapping around Maria like a whispered shield. "They'll follow our trail, no doubt. Too many hands loyal to that sheriff." Maria nodded, swallowing the lump that tightened at the back of her throat. To be fugitives was no stranger place, but the stakes had never been higher. She raised her head, letting the chill wind grip her unsettled hair, and exhaled a breath that tasted of both fear and resolve. "I owe you more than words," she said quietly, the weight of her past flickering in the depths of her eyes. "You saved me from that cage, but I don't know what future waits." Nico gave a brief, grim smile. "None of us do. But out there," he gestured toward the shadowed horizon, "there's land that belongs to my people, a place where we can find shelter, strength. It's not perfect, but it's a chance." The silence between them held the unspoken truths. His exile, a solitary shadow among the Comanche. Her fracture from a cruel world unwilling to forgive. The wide plains might welcome wanderers, but acceptance was a gauntlet, not a gift. Hours bled away as they navigated creeks swollen with last night's rains, and climbed rocky outcroppings, sharp beneath boot soles. Maria learned to quiet her breath when the soft scrape of stones echoed too distinctly, to listen for the telltale signs of pursuers close behind. They shared fragile stories in murmurs, the comfort of human voice threading through the tension. Pieces of broken lives laid bare in the quiet refuge of companionship. But in the shroud of twilight, as shadows deepened and the wind rose colder, an unwelcome presence stirred. Perched high on a distant ridge, a lone figure watched with narrowing eyes. Cloaked in dust and dusk, a man's breath came steady against the rising chill. His gaze tracked the two fleeing shapes cutting swiftly through the landscape, wounded but unyielding. His hand tightened on the reins, the embers of a grim purpose kindling beneath a stoic calm. Without a word, he turned his horse, spurring off toward the town below, a dark messenger riding swift through the gathering night. The sheriff would be warned anew. The fugitives were not free, not yet. The hunt was far from over, and as the horizon swallowed the fading light, the vastness of the frontier held its breath. The perilous journey to the Comanche lands had begun, and with it, the fragile hope for redemption, faced the grinding gears of a merciless world. The sun hung low beyond the jagged horizon as Nico crossed the threshold of the Comanche reservation. The air, heavier here than in the unforgiving town they had fled, smelled of warmed earth and ancient fires. Yet beneath the familiar sense of home lurked unease. The tall figures, carved from sun and shadow by the fading light, were not welcoming as expected. Instead, watchful eyes, sharp and uncertain, followed his every step. The anciao, the tribe's stoic elder, stood before the gathered council, his face a tapestry of years and wisdom. His gaze settled on Nico, lingering with quiet reproach. "You bring a woman to us," he said, voice low but carrying the weight of many seasons. "A stranger, marked by chains and shame. Do you understand the risk to our people? Your honor is tested, Comanche, and your judgment." Nico's jaw clenched beneath his sun-creased skin. He met the elder's piercing eyes without flinch. Maria's captivity was cruelty, not justice. She carries more than scars. She bears truth. To turn her away is to deny the code we live by. Murmurs rippled through the gathered tribe, some of skepticism, others of subdued curiosity. Maria, standing quietly beside Nico, let the weight of their gaze settle on her. Her hands trembled briefly, but she stood straighter than she had in months. The dust of outlaw and prisoner lifted from her posture by a fragile new hope. In the shadows of the council circle, the young braves exchanged doubtful glances. To accept the outsider risked bringing enemies closer. But the quiet fire in Maria's eyes hinted at a strength few dared measure. Days passed like slow-moving storms. Maria learned the rhythms of survival beyond the cage, the crackle of fire opening the night, the sharp scent of sage in the dawn air, the steady beat of drums marking passage and presence. She earned cautious respect among the youth, with quiet demonstrations of resilience, patching torn hides with nimble fingers, listening with intent to stories of the land and spirits, and offering whispered words of hope to those who needed them most. Nico, meanwhile, navigated the thorny path between his place among his people and the fragile new bond with Maria. Every conversation with the anciao was a balancing act between tradition and compassion, security and justice. The elders' doubts were heavy, yet beneath them lay a grudging respect born from Nico's unwavering commitment. The night air grew tense as whispers crept like wildfire beyond the horizon. Word had slipped past the reservation's bounds. The sheriff's thirst for vengeance remained unquenched. Gunsmiths tuned their rifles, and rough voices plodded among shadows. The man who claimed law and order was coming, headstrong and merciless. The fragile sanctuary brimmed with quiet urgency. Nico stood with the tribe's warriors, faces hardened against uncertainty. Maria sat near a fire, the crackling embers reflecting in eyes that had seen too much but refused to yield. Suddenly, the distant rumble of horse hooves shattered the calm like thunder breaking over dry earth. The sharp beat of hooves multiplied, an approaching storm charging across the plains. Nico's gaze sliced through the night, catching the glint of steel and the resolve carved into every silhouetted form. The sheriff was coming, and he brought an army, a relentless force fueled by fear, greed, and hatred. A cold silence fell. The tribe gathered to face the impending onslaught, their bodies taut as bowstrings. The time for words had passed. A fierce clash, brutal and unyielding, was about to erupt beneath the vast stars. The fate of Maria, of Nico, and of the fragile peace between worlds would be decided in the fire that followed. And from the edge of the reservation, a lone scout's shadow slipped swiftly through the darkness, bearing grim news back to those who thirsted for capture. The hunt was far from over. The distant rumble of hooves grew sharper against the fading twilight, carrying with it the looming shadow of the sheriff's armed posse, descending upon the Comanche reservation. Nico's gaze cut through the dusky air as warriors stirred, their hands firm on bows and rifles, faces set like stone. Around the flickering fire, Maria sat steady, the embers reflecting in eyes now alight with a courage born of shared struggle and a newfound family. The elder's voice broke the tense silence, calling the council to attention. "This is no simple raid," he warned. "The sheriff comes not just for vengeance, but for control. We stand between his tyranny and the fragile peace we have built." His weathered hands extended toward Nico. "Your choice to bring Maria here carries risk," he said quietly. "But your honor binds us to her protection." Nico nodded, fatigue etched deep beneath his determined brow. "She is more than a victim," he replied. "She bears witness to his darkest crimes. To deny her sanctuary is to betray justice itself." The tribe gathered swiftly, positioning along the reservation's edge, a fierce line of resolve against the encroaching threat. As the thunder of hooves approached, tension rippled like a taut bowstring ready to snap. The sheriff's band stormed into the borders, rough faces sneering beneath dust-caked hats, guns flashing with hungry intent. They believed the night's shadows would hide their violent purpose. Instead, they met a tempest. Native tactics unfolded with graceful precision. Warriors moved as shadows among the trees. Arrows whispered death through the air, and quick reinforcements flanked the attackers with unyielding will. The first volleys shattered the eerie calm, igniting the plain in fierce conflict. Amid the chaos, Nico found himself face to face with the sheriff beneath a blood-red sky. The man who had ruled through fear and lies now stood vulnerable, his rage boiling over like wildfire. Their eyes locked, a clash of wills as raw as any gunfire. Steel met steel as Nico parried the sheriff's brutal strikes with practiced grace. The fight was more than a duel. It was the culmination of all their pain, anger, and desperate hope for justice. Blow after blow echoed beneath the storm's drumbeat as rain began to fall, mingling with sweat and blood. Nearby, Maria moved among the wounded, her hands steady despite the tremors of fear beneath her resolve. She whispered words of comfort, tending to bruised bodies and calming trembling breaths. Her presence was a balm in the heart of battle, a reminder of why they fought. Hope welded from pain, the human spirit unbroken. As the duel reached fever pitch, Nico seized an opening. With one final, decisive movement, he disarmed the sheriff, pinning the man beneath the weight of justice long overdue. The sheriff's sneer faltered, his eyes flickering with a dark recognition. The reign of terror was ending. Though victorious, Nico staggered, the wounds he had borne throughout their flight now demanding reckoning. A sharp pain blossomed in his side, but triumph tempered the agony. The tribe rallied around him, strength swelling in the shared breath of survival. With the sheriff defeated, the attackers faltered, their resolve crumbling beneath the relentless spirit of the Comanche defenders. Some fled into the night, broken and beaten. Others surrendered, their faces pale with the taste of defeat. As dawn painted the sky with hues of gold and rose, a calm settled over the land, hard-won and fragile, but undeniable. Maria stood beside Nico near a smoldering fire, the first light casting gentle warmth on faces marked by fear and hope alike. The anciao approached, eyes softened by trust and respect. "You have honored the tribe's code," he murmured. "Maria is ours now, and so too is the path forward. You both carry the wounds of yesterday, but the future is yours to weave." Maria lifted her gaze, meeting their elders with quiet pride. "I have found a family I never expected. Here, I am more than a prisoner. I am part of something greater." Nico's reply was a slow, grateful nod. "Together, we have broken chains not only of iron, but of fear and silence." He looked toward the horizon, where the first birds greeted the morning with hopeful song. "This land holds scars like our own, but it offers healing to those willing to walk its paths." The nearby village began to stir, the people emerging from their homes, with tentative smiles and tentative hands, reaching out to the newcomers. The barriers between worlds, once sharp and unyielding, shimmered now with the promise of understanding and shared strength. Maria's lips curved in a faint but real smile as she stepped forward, the dust of her past settling behind like a shadow left at the crossroads. Her journey from caged outcast to embraced daughter of the land was a testament, etched in sweat and tears, in battles fought both without and within. Nico stood beside her, the stoic guardian, no longer solitary, but bound by a powerful new kinship. Together, they watched as the sun rose higher, bathing the reservation in light that whispered of fresh beginnings. The town to the east lay silent and wary, its grip weakened and indecisive. Justice had pierced the darkness, but the true victory was born in the union forged that stormy night between two worlds once divided by fear and pain. The scars would remain, as would the memories of sacrifice and loss. Yet from those scars grew a hope fierce and enduring, that even in the harshest lands, honor, compassion, and resilience could weave destinies anew. And so, as the wind carried the first warm breath of the morning across the vast frontier, Maria and Nico stepped forward into a future shaped not by chains or bullets, but by the unbreakable strength of the human heart and the possibility of peace. Their story had reached an end, but the legacy they forged would echo across the plains, a beacon for all who dared to dream of freedom and belonging in a land that had once known only exile and sorrow.